the earlier incarnation of the NDA government.
Yes.
They changed the NCERT textbooks, particularly again history. History was their sort of target. Evolution is something that is very much part and parcel of the existing sort of scholarship on the early phase of human
development,
society,
Yes.
the way in which it evolved. Interestingly, this is something that was removed from science textbooks also.
Hello and welcome to Left Lens. Today we have Professor Amar Farooqui with us. He has had a distinguished career as a historian, teaching in Delhi University. He was a professor there. He was also a fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, which is commonly known as the Teen Murthy Library. Comrade Farooqui, good to have you with us. Welcome to Left Lens. Your craft is of the writing of history. Today in India, there is a lot of serious concern about how history is being rewritten. So let's start with that. Specifically, the NCERT textbooks, grades 11 and 12, the history syllabus, the textbooks have been revamped. Class 8, the new textbooks. Can you give us a little bit of detail on this?
Yeah, textbooks, particularly NCERT textbooks, have been a very contentious issue. Contentious because the kind of history which NCERT textbooks and social sciences, which NCERT textbooks have tried to incorporate and make available for school students, came under threat. If you might recall, way back first in 1977,
Yes.
when after when the Janata Party came to power, it tried to remove textbooks which were written by eminent scholars, respected historians, who had actually done this as writing school books was seen by them as an important task, and so these were sought to be removed. Again, in the earlier incarnation of the NDA government, they changed the NCERT textbooks, particularly again history. History was their sort of target, and now, of course, last few years, this regime has been trying to remove and has actually managed to change textbooks, which with great difficulty, with enormous amount of effort, were put together by a large number of scholars who had worked on it for several years, and these books were discarded, and they've been sort of initially the argument was that they need to be rationalized, so they were changed, and now of course we have new textbooks. One of the textbooks which recently came out was the class 8 NCERT book, textbook on social sciences, which has a large component on history. Now, I think it's important to understand that textbooks are supposed to reflect the scholarly consensus in any discipline. And that scholarly consensus in history or in other disciplines should also be something which sort of takes into account recent advances. So history textbooks have to, like other textbooks, you're not going to teach chemistry or physics through textbooks, something that was taught 50 years ago. But in fact, what is really happening is, this is one of the big problems that, apart from the omissions, apart from the politics of history, in terms of pedagogy, they're actually going back to an earlier period, something that was outdated even 50, 60 years ago, focusing on individuals, on rulers in particular, or rewarding good rulers, punishing bad rulers by removing them from the syllabus. So this is a major concern. The pedagogy itself. I mean, historians today don't really study individuals in the way these textbooks seek to sort of portray certain individuals as good, others as villains, or completely drop them. So this is one major concern. But then there is also the concern that certain areas and certain periods of Indian history are being gradually sort of removed. Particularly the medieval period is sort of not is downgraded, and in many cases it's sort of absent. Many aspects of medieval history on which there's a very rich historiography. There's a very rich scholarship that is being removed because the medieval is equated with Muslims, and that is supposed to be a kind of dark age. Also in class 8, there's another kind of absence, which is the absence of large part of southern India.
Yes.
And I think this is a serious omission, particularly in NCERT textbooks, because NCERT textbooks, even though they might not be taught in schools in states, nevertheless NCERT textbooks are provide the model for what is to be taught in a particular subject for schools in states also, and doing this is presenting a very bad model, and it's supposed to take into account the diversity that exists in this country. That's why NCERT is an institution which is supposed to sort of produce textbooks which take into account that diversity also.
You mentioned a few things which we will come back to, specifically on the medieval period, the Mughals, the downgrading, vilification, things like that. We will come back to it. But what interested me, we're going to digress a bit from history now into the theory of evolution. Surprisingly, even that has been sidelined. I remember the previous Minister of State for Human Resource Development, Satyapal Singh, he said that it is not a scientific theory. He said that it should be removed from the textbooks and the syllabi in schools and colleges, that no one ever saw an ape transforming into a man. And then on the heels of statements like that, textbooks are being rewritten, the syllabi is being changed. How do you look at this happening? What is the real agenda here?
Yeah, I think it's really sad that personal opinions are and political opinions of the Sangh Parivar are actually determining what goes into a textbook and what is removed from a textbook. People have their individual opinions, and that's if somebody as an individual has a particular opinion, they have a right to it. But this cannot be the basis for a textbook, because as I said earlier, a textbook is supposed to reflect the scholarly consensus in any field. Also, it is supposed to acquaint students with the latest advances in any field. Now, the theory of the evolution is something that is very much part and parcel of the existing sort of scholarship on the early phase of human development, society, the way in which it evolved. Interestingly, this is something that was removed from science textbooks also. And one would have thought that, well, perhaps this would have been retained in history textbooks, particularly because it's impossible to understand the Paleolithic, or what is popularly known as the Old Stone Age, without an understanding of evolution, for the simple reason that biological evolution is taking place simultaneously along with the changes that are taking place in tool technology. So those two processes have to be studied simultaneously, which is the way in which they are taught to students. Anyone studying the Paleolithic has to be aware of these sort of the biological changes, and when those and the ways in which those biological changes are having an impact on the technology itself. So both go simultaneously. To remove that is to give the student absolutely student would have absolutely no sense of this kind of development. I mean, I'm not a specialist in science, but I have at least some understanding of the way in which the history of human evolution. And one of the important things that we need to keep in mind is, and that's also what Darwin and what those who have further worked within that paradigm have sort of emphasized the fact that changes in which eventually lead to human evolution are take place over a very long period of time.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, for the human mind to be able to grasp the scale on which time is really very
Yes.
difficult.
Yes.
It actually is something that occurs over lakhs of years. So the transition from the ape to modern humans or the Homo sapiens is a process that spread over several lakh years.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yes, so it's really not possible for any human being to
see it.
Moreover, we should also remember that the history of this evolution is really known to us from fossils.
Yes.
Because what you might call the intermediate sort of species have actually become extinct. So we don't. The only way in which we can know it. So these are things you can't observe. You only know from a great deal of fossil evidence and archaeological evidence and other evidence which historians have sort of worked on techniques to understand and date those fossils and changes over the past nearly 150 years.
So in a sense, what you're saying is, with this rewriting, there is some sort of an injustice that is being done to not just history, but also to even biology.
It is indeed.
And the issue at hand is that the National Council of Education Research and Training, which is supposed to be an autonomous organization to improve the quality of school education in India, is in fact acting as an arm post of the RSS-led BJP government and making changes that are tailor-made to suit their ideological moorings. What do you think is the end game here?
Yeah, once again, it's very important to understand that these textbooks and school education and university education is supposed to give to students a scientific outlook. It's supposed to make them think rationally. And when they are fed histories which are not scientific, or when you tamper with science itself, natural sciences, then they are unlikely to have a rational scientific outlook. Because rational thinking is what students is, it's not likely that students, when they pass out of, let's say, college, they are going to do research in history. For them, many dates are going to be irrelevant. What they will retain is the way they comprehend this world. And unless they have a rational understanding of this world, unless they have some scientific understanding of this world, they can't really make sense of reality. And it's therefore very necessary that these textbooks are able to train students to think rationally and scientifically. On the other hand, what do we have? We have assertions about history made by right wing historians, by the Sangh Parivar, assertions which are supposed to be communal, which are reflected in, which are the product of communal historiography, which then when they, for instance, there is recently this, just to cite one example, there's been this big attempt to rename the Indus Valley civilization, or what historians usually refer to as the Harappan civilization. Now, this is accepted terminology. In scholarly writing, Harappan civilization is the accepted terminology. To change that to the Saraswati civilization, or the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, is to go against the scholarly writing in that field. Not only that, now the way in which textbooks are being written, they are showing a continuity between the Harappan civilization and the Vedic period.
Yes.
In fact, in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been an enormous emphasis on the certain kinds of excavations, archaeological excavations, as for instance, at Rakhigadi, and more so at Sonali, where one of the finds has been of the remains of a wheeled chariot-like object, and this has those connected with the ASI, and this ASI is an official body which is also supposed to be which is an autonomous and which has a great tradition of scholarship. They've jumped to the conclusion that this is a horse-drawn chariot. So it's a chariot-like object, and but to draw this conclusion that this is a horse-drawn chariot, and the horse is supposed to be, since it is associated with the Vedic period, it is supposed to be, and since there have been hardly any, there have been no remains of the domesticated horse found in the Harappan civilization, to jump to this conclusion is to then try and interpret this as being a product, a continuity between the Vedic age and the Harappan civilization, which can't really be sustained. Now, to put that into a textbook, which is being done, is also a serious problem, because these are matters of debate among archaeologists. In fact, we don't even have the full report of those excavations. And then there has to be a lot of scholarly writing, and then there has to be a consensus, and then it can get to a textbook, which is actually not happening.
In fact, historically, the Vedic period is not an immediate continuation. There is a gap. They're not even accounting for that. Now, let's come from school textbooks to what is happening in universities. In the Delhi University's history syllabus itself, you are seeing the medieval period, something that you had referred to earlier, being, let's say, there is being a one-sided approach. In historiography, the narratives, the different sources, all this matter. But when you are going down only one lane, how is this going to affect the quality of historical research and scholarly work that is produced in the discipline of history?
I would say it is going to seriously have a very adverse impact, very serious kind of impact on the way students are studying history, and then if they go on to do research on history, because once again what's happening is, this understanding that the medieval period is to be equated with the Muslims, and therefore it is a kind of dark age, which actually comes to us an idea which is something that you find also in colonial historiography.
Yes.
So this and this is what is shaping the way in which syllabi are being changed. In fact, Delhi University, following the UGC's sort of model syllabus, has been in the process of revising its syllabus for quite some time. And in the last few years, what has actually happened is that the medieval period has somehow been pushed into the background. It has become the main target, and also there's this emphasis on invasions. So the idea that you have Muslim invasions. This is a period of invasions, and so other developments of this long period from, let's say, the 8th century down to the 18th century, almost 1,000 years, becomes just something about Muslim invasions. Now that that's part of a political propaganda, political agenda, which seeks to propagate a communal understanding of India's past. That this is a past that doesn't belong to us, and this is what is getting reflected in the kind of revisions that are taking place. For instance, there was some attempt recently to to remove some of the themes that are related to the history of Delhi, the medieval period of Delhi, the Delhi Sultanate, for example, also the Mughal period. The argument being that earlier periods have not been studied adequately. Now, this isn't really correct, because actually they were very much part of a course that was taught in Delhi University of Delhi through the ages, which did have which covered the period from the prehistoric period right up to the modern period. In fact, contemporary period. So it's not as if it's a focus on only the medieval period. But then the point is that a large part of the development, the expansion of Delhi and its emergence as an urban center actually took place during the Sultanate period.
Yes.
Firoz Shah Tughlaq, for instance, is very important to the emergence of Delhi as a city, as an urban center. Not just for in terms of structures, but also the sort of water bodies that were created by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, or the bringing the Ashokan pillars to Delhi, installing one of them on the ridge, the other at Firoz Shah Kotla, which are still there. So it's not really possible to, and there's a scholarship on that, because a lot of topics actually get determined what is available, what are readings available. So that's a period that cannot be wished away. And this is precisely what is being sought to be done in these writings. Also, by setting up separate centers for studying partition, for instance, in a particular way. On the one hand, partition has been removed from the older NCERT textbook, where it is dealt with very sensitively. And there's a large scholarship there's a large amount of historical writing on partition experiences, oral testimonies, and so on. But that was removed earlier. So partition is another issue which becomes a target of this kind of teaching of history, writing of history, and the setting up of separate sort of centers which would be studying partition in a way which would only acquaint students with a communal understanding of what happened during
you
partition.
Mentioned that the colonial interpretation. Interestingly, those who want to portray themselves as those who fought the colonizers, though they weren't, there is a lot of historical evidence to that effect. They are using the same tools that the colonialists use. That when it comes to history writing. Also, at the same time, you see those who are in power, those who are holding important offices, talking of what you refer to as 1,000 years of foreign rule, talking of Mughals as cruel despots, as foreigners. But you see, Mughals played a very important role in even taking Sanskrit literature. Ramayana, for instance, was translated into Persian under the Mughals. How justifiable is it historically to actually make these kind of statements?
Yes, let me sort of begin by making a reference to a historian who belongs, in a sense, is really the most well-known of the first generation of historians writing in India, Jagannath Sarkar. He's by no stretch of imagination a left-wing
Not at all.
Marxist historian. He wrote a 5-volume history of the period of Aurangzeb,
Yes.
which he followed up with a 4-volume history of the fall of the Mughal Empire. He made use of source material which was so difficult to access. I'm talking of the early decades of the 20th century, when it was really difficult for scholars to sort of access that kind of material in Persian and also translations of Marathi and so on. Now, he had, he's a sort of he's a fierce critic of the policies of Aurangzeb, for example. But he has a perspective of the Mughals,
Yes.
which is a perspective that where the Mughals were attempting to create a society which took into account the diversity of this large empire that they had created. And he sees Akbar as very, very important, the role of Akbar as being very important in that. And then one of his historical questions was, so, Akbar, his immediate successors, they created this empire which accommodated a great deal of diversity, which was an empire which took, where it was the importance of an individual to the empire rather than religion that was important. So they incorporated within the ruling, class also, groups which were elites, which were from other religious communities, other than those who sort of had, were Muslims. So this was the kind of state that was being created. And then Yaduna Sarkar felt that, well, through this study of Aurangzeb, he would be able to figure out what went wrong. So his research question really is about what went wrong. So he sees, this pan-Indian empire that is being created, which suddenly sort of began facing problems in the last decades of the 17th century. So, this is the perspective with which even, scholars like Yadunnath Sarkar, who have been criticized, of course, by Marxists, or by left-wing historians, for a variety of reasons, but they, devoted a great deal of time and energy to studying the Mughal period. Now, in the kind of attempt that you have now, which is to do away with the Mughals or Mughal historiography, it really comes to us from the colonial understanding of the Mughal period. The British thought that they were, as successors to the Mughals, they had to actually portray themselves as being better than the Mughals. So they began demonizing many of the Mughal rulers, particularly Aurangzeb onwards, and of course the later Mughals. And that demonization became useful for communal historiography. So they incorporated many ideas from communal historiography, from colonial historiography. In fact, it is colonial historiography which speaks continuously about Muslim invasions and its disruption of Indian society. It's a different matter that they also simultaneously say that India has no history. And then when they talk about history, they divide it into a Hindu period, a Muslim period. That is completely taken over by colonial historiography. So the medieval is equated with Muslim. And being equated with Muslim, obviously, it is seen as a dark age. And that is where this understanding of 1,000 years of slavery comes from. This is something that you would find repeatedly mentioned in colonial writings. India's sort of slavery of 1,000 years, this is way back in the 1842. Lord Ellenborough, just to cite one example, Lord Ellenborough, who was Governor General at that time and who had just taken over immediately after the British defeat in the First Afghan War. First Afghan War is 1839, 1842. Yes, and so he just took over at that time. And he, after suffering this humiliating defeat, which is the biggest defeat the British suffered actually in a colonial war in the early part of the 19th century, he then put together an army which is supposed to march into Afghanistan to display British power and strength. And one of the instructions given was that they should visit Ghazni and the tomb of Mahmud Ghazni and bring back the so-called gates of Somnath. Now, those gates of Somnath were found to be a fabrication, and they're still there in the Agra fort, where they can still be seen. But the point is that at that time, when those gates were brought back, Ellenborough made the statement that 800 years of insult have been avenged.
Yes.
So that now becomes 1,000 years of slavery. So you find this continuously being stated, the way in which the Muslim invaders took over. Let's also bear in mind that no empire expands without violence.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the Mughals, it's other empires also expanded in a similar manner. Pre-Mughal or those which were contemporaries of Mughals, they all expanded in the same way. This is something also that we must bear in mind. So all these ideas are actually incorporated with the, from the late 19th century, ideas about India's past began to be, thought of as that great glorious age, from remote times, which then came to an end in the medieval period, which becomes a dark age.
Let me point to two things that you mentioned and try to see if we can understand what is happening in Indian academia today. You use the word demonizing. This demonizing is not just with regard to history now. Currently, you see people who are asking questions also being demonized. In fact, academics itself is supposed to enable both students and teachers to ask questions. You look at different sources, you ask the right kind of questions, you try to draw answers, you look at as many sources as possible. Earlier we mentioned about different narratives. All these have to be factored in. But now there's an issue that even teachers are being taken to courts for some of their lectures. Discussion debates on some subjects or topics that are deemed disturbances by those in power are not allowed to be taken place. It is almost like a culture of fear is sort of be permeated in academic spaces. How do you think Indian academics, the academic space, can come out of this? How do you think Indian academia can stand up on its feet and raise questions, not just about what is being taught or what they're being pushed down their throats, but also questions to those in power? What do you think is the way out ultimately?
Way out is, of course, resisting such attempts to curtail, the kind of academic debate which is what makes a university a university.
Yes.
We need to understand that it's not as if people don't have differences of opinion. Knowledge grows with debate, and universities have been spaces where these debates have taken place. Very fierce debates have taken place. I mean, for instance, there are debates among Marxists about interpreting a particular period, or what led to change, or what led to a crisis. So these are fierce debates. So university is the space for that debate, and a debate has to be an informed debate. What is happening now is that debates are sought to be stifled by instilling fear in people that you will be taken to court, you will have an FIR lodged against you,
disciplinary measures,
disciplinary action will be take place. So this is a way of. So there is only one particular point of view which has to prevail, which is determined again by the political dispensation that is in power. So that is what. So people, I mean, talking about history, people who have absolutely, I mean, we wouldn't sort of really listen seriously to somebody who talks about, say, neutrons and electrons and protons, who doesn't have any basic understanding of physics or chemistry. But history, people who have absolutely no training in history, who have no understanding of its protocols, hold forth, give views, and insist that their views must be accepted, and use political power to enforce sort of acceptance of those views, and thereby put an end to debate. So the only way to do it is resistance, to go on, in the classroom, talking to students, doing your research. I think, that's the only way in which we can do. But of course, there are larger issues which are related to, the, the politics of the nation, and that also will determine the, whether or not it will be possible to continue with teaching the way teachers or academics have been engaging with students, with researchers over the years.
I hope that the tradition of debate continues, and I hope resistance also continues. Professor Farooqui, thank you very much for a very enriching discussion. Thank you for joining us. With that, it will be a wrap of this episode's Left Lens. Thank you.
Thank you.